Power Up Gaming, the only destination you need for retro video games, consoles, and accessories. Want access to exclusive specials? Like us on Facebook.
Thanks for joining me. Have another customer system here, and this is actually a 3D XL, 3DS XL that is having problems with the charge port. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please click the subscribe button just down below here. We do a lot of repair videos, show you how to actually do walkthroughs on different repairs. This one is a little bit more difficult unless you have a good soldering iron with a nice fine tip on it. And the 3DS XL is a little bit harder to do too, with a lot more risk to actually the traces themselves. And we'll go through why that is too. But we'll get started on this one in a second. I will also talk, so this is, let me just go to the zoomed in shot. Let's go to the regular bench. Actually, go zoomed in shot here. Okay, and I'll move that out of the way. So this is a limited edition Luigi system. And I'm just going to show this because it's kind of cringe-worthy in a while. A little bit anyways. So I love these limited edition systems. Huge fan. I have a few that are complete in box, sealed. I like collecting them. But this one here, as you can tell, it's pretty scratched up. And the reason for that is because the parent, I mean, keep in mind that these systems typically sell for the same price as any other system that that gets released around the same time. In some cases, a few bucks more, but I mean, if you're just buying a 3DS XL and there just happens to be a limited edition system and it's the same price as any other one, feel free, buy it, no big deal. But if you're actually looking at keeping it in good shape, stay away from any of the Nerf cases or any of those protective cases to put on them to actually keep them in good shape, because the only thing it does do is prevent them from breaking. The one thing they do not do is keep them in good shape. Any kind of dirt, crud that gets inside the actual case, gets in between the case and the actual DS itself, will scratch the hell out of the cover, as you can see here. So that's just a little side note. So what we're going to do is take out the cartridge here. Probably has a memory card in here, so we're going to take out the memory card too. We'll take, oh, the stylus is already out of there, so that's good. Okay, so first off, I don't know where my screwdrivers are in there, but they're in the wrong spot. Okay, so we're going to remove the two screws that hold the back cover on here. And just as a little side note, this does pop up. When you're doing it, just be careful. I've seen a few of them come in where it's actually broken around the stylus here, so it'll be a stress crack right here. If you just pull up here, in some cases it won't actually release around the stylus and you'll actually get a crack over here. So what you want to do is just kind of lift up by the stylus there and it'll actually just pop right up. So what we're going to do is remove the battery. There's a little tab here. Just pull up on the battery and that pulls out. So from here, we'll start with the two harder to get out pieces, which are these sticky tabs. Anything sharp under one of the edges, we'll pop those out and we'll put those aside somewhere safe so we can put those in afterwards, because there is two screws underneath those. Anything sharp, even a razor blade just lightly under the edge, will actually raise those out. All the screws on this, you don't need a tri-wing or anything to actually take it out. All you need is a very fine Phillips screwdriver to actually take all these out. These systems are relatively easy to work on. Nice thing about changing the charge port out on these versus the earlier systems before the 3DS is you don't actually have to take them out of the case. Why is that screwdriver not going in there? Okay, let's switch to a lighter one here, or a thinner one. Okay, so you don't actually have to take them out of the case. They are surface mount parts, so they don't need to come out of the case. And one thing we do a little bit different than perhaps some other people is we actually use, even on the 3DS XL, we use a 3DS charge port rather than the 3DS XL charge port. And the reason for that is the 3DS XL charge port has 2 more solder points. But the way the solder points are actually laid out is completely blocks 2 of the solder points underneath, that you don't actually get access to it. The only way you can actually get access to it is using a reflow table, and it's completely pointless. In order to get to those solder points, you would end up having to actually remove the whole entire board and actually put it onto a table with tape on it and everything else. And I should say that's actually for these ones here. But we use the regular 3DS charge ports on it. It's very similar in design to those ones, and it's got pretty much the exact same solder points. It's just slightly different in size. So when it actually goes on, the actual solder pads themselves are a little bit shorter. So when it actually goes in the docking station, there's a little bit of black showing at the top, but it actually makes perfect connection. That's what works. We've done it on probably about 30 or 40 of these systems. Works perfectly, no issues, and it's a nice lasting repair with less issues when we're actually soldering them in and taking care of these systems. So that's what we tend to do on these ones. So I'm just going to heat up the soldering iron because we will need that. As long as it turns on there. Okay. So the issue with these in a lot of cases, they're very flimsy. But the other issue with all the DSs in general, the soldering job that Nintendo does is really, really pathetic. Actually, this one's not that bad. The amount of solder that's on the pads is acceptable in this case. And a lot of the original 3DSs, the ports are actually in really nice shape. But what's happened is the actual charge port will actually pull off the pads because there's barely any solder to actually hold the actual charge port down on the pads. So in a lot of cases, it's actually breaking without the actual port actually physically breaking. It's just breaking right off the actual charge port, or on the actual solder pads on the main board, which is truly pathetic. So this is a multi-step process. We'll walk through it slowly, and I'm going to try and get the microscope, well, the endoscope cam set up here so we can actually get a closer look, so you can actually see what I'm going to be doing here. And we'll try and get it tuned in. So I'm going to try and keep my fingers out of the way, but I also want to get this job done too, because it is extremely late. I'm actually working a late night here to try and get caught up. So the first thing we're going to try and do is just get rid of some of the actual solder that is currently in place on those pads. It'll just make it a little easier when we go to actually remove the port that is actually right there right now. So there's a few things we can actually do. One of the things is actually, so when they're actually doing it, they're actually using non-leaded solder. Non-leaded solder has a higher melting point than leaded solder, and applying non-leaded solder to it means that we can actually remove the non-leaded solder a lot easier. So one thing you can actually do is actually go over the pads with a little bit of leaded solder, and you're actually mixing non-leaded solder and leaded solder together, and that'll allow you to actually remove more of the old solder when you actually use the solder braid. So now that we have kind of a mixture, we can actually go in there and try and remove as much of the solder as we can. And I always say in some of my other videos, I hate using solder braid. This is one of those times that, I mean, solder braid is kind of a must. And as long as you're actually using flux on it, solder braid does work extremely well. Solder sucker, on the other hand, like one of the manual solder suckers, hate those things. Can't stand them. Can't get them to work very well. I would much rather use my, I got a Heiko desoldering iron. Love that thing. But you can't get into fine detail work like this with a desoldering gun. So the deep in soldering points, you won't be able to get in there with the solder braid very well in order to get those off. It's just one of those things you have to kind of expect, that you won't be able to get into there the same way. And just kind of wiggle that around, get it nice and hot. Try and remove as much as we can, and we'll get in there. The last point. May apply a little bit more flux on there. The flux allows the actual solder to flow. And that's the important part. So we'll try adding a little bit more, and we'll see if we can get up a little more the old solder first off. And what we're trying to do here is actually remove it so that we're not pulling the pads up when we take off the old one. If we did pull the pad, we can repair it. It's just more work. So a little bit of preparation work here may actually save us a lot of time in the long run. If I can do this job in 15 minutes, great. I'd rather not spend an hour and a half if I only have to spend 15 minutes. Not that I would ever spend an hour and a half doing a job like this, in which case I'd be losing money, so I wouldn't be able to do the other customers' work. And I apologize if you hear the dog in the background. It's past his bedtime and he gets a little whiny. Right now it's about 2 o'clock in the morning and we're still at work. Sometimes when the repairs get backed up and we got customers waiting for systems, we just keep working. So the store is physically closed, but the repair department stays open. I get a lot more stuff done at night, and it gives me a chance to actually do these videos without Facebook going off all the time, and without customer requests or anything going off. So that looks pretty good so far, and I can already tell that that's coming off. So at this point, and this may be a little hard to show, what I typically do, this part here is actually plastic and extremely hot. So what I typically do is try and actually lift off each individual pad. So that should be that one lifted up. And I apologize, it's actually out of camera right now. So you can see how that's actually lifted off. It's really hard to do this on camera. This is where the telescope's going to come in a lot handier, I think. Just with this kind of delicate stuff, because I got to apply a little bit of force on it, but not too much that I'm going to pull the pads, and I'm not really looking at it directly on, because I want you guys to be able to see it too. So it kind of messes with my my vision. So the end plastic pieces, once you get the pads lifted, the end plastic pieces will actually just break off. They only really have one purpose. So you can actually just kind of break those off, so we're only looking at the main part of it. And what I will show you now is the reason why we use the 3DS charge ports. So let me see if I can focus in a little better here. Okay. So, now that I've broken off that plastic piece, there's this solder point here, and then there's one on the other side. So these ones here is Nintendo's solution to what I was talking about with the original 3DS. So this 3DS port here is the one we actually solder onto place, and you can see that, you know, it's got the outside solder point, it's got this one here, and then it's got the actual pins, and then that one there, then the outside. So these ones, the gray ones, are actually just mounting points to the board. So this one here and this one here are just mounting points to the actual board. This one and this one are for the actual docking station that you can put the 3DS into, and these ones are the main pins that get hooked up for the charging here. So their solution to the issue of this being pulled off the board is to give you these extra points here to make it harder for this port to actually be pulled off. The problem is that with these plastic pieces that actually go into place on the actual unit, you don't have access to that pad that's way underneath at the end of it. The only way you'd actually have access to it is to actually use a either a hot torch, like a hot air torch, or a soldering station. You would actually have to heat it from the other side. So what you would actually do is pull this board, and you would pull this board completely, use a hot air torch from the back side of this board, heat it up from the back side, which would melt all the solder, and then this port would actually just fall right off. And then what you would do is you would apply new solder to those points, clamp this piece in place, and then you would heat up the board again, and then that port would actually be soldered in place. So that's the alternative way of actually doing it. It's more of a lengthy process. There's a lot of, I mean, if I actually take a look here, it's going to be hard to show you anyways. But there's a lot of ribbon cables, a lot of finicky things to actually take out this main board, and it would just cost our customers a lot more. This solution used in the original 3DS works extremely well, and that's the solution we took. More cost effective for the customer, gets it back quicker, a lot easier for the customer, and it works extremely well. So, a few reasons of why we do it. So what we're going to do is, once again, now that we got access to those solder points, we're going to remove the as much of the solder as we can at those points, so we can try removing the port without damaging anything, without pulling the pads up. And as I keep on mentioning, I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to, you know, if I can do things the proper way, I will absolutely do it, rather than do things poorly. So I'm always looking for new ways to do things. If anybody ever has any suggestions on how they do something, if they're watching one of my videos and they're like, you know what, you're totally doing that the hard way, feel free to let me know, and I will absolutely listen to your idea. Doesn't mean I'm going to adapt it, but I will absolutely listen to your idea and, you know, perhaps adapt it. Okay. So, I'm just going to turn it this way, just so I can get access to. Again, never really done this on camera, so. That side is up. Just gonna keep on rotating it here, and I'm gonna keep on trying to get it back in camera. Just trying to get it freed up from the actual board here, again, without lifting any pads or anything, without causing any stress to any pads. Okay, and then we can take a look at the actual pads themselves. So, the O port is off. Because here's the concern. If we had any damage to any of those pads, we're losing our bonding points with the new port on there. So, as mentioned, we've got 6 contact points with the new port. If we were to, say, lose that point right there, we would now have 5 points. If we were to lose that one and this one, we now only have 3 points. Sorry. 4 points. So we want to try and maintain as many points as we possibly can. So all those pads are pretty much clean. There's not a lot of solder. We pulled up all the solder to start with. So all these points are pretty much clean. There's no extra cleaning that I need to do. What I tend to do is just put it down into place, and then I place solder on one of the solder points to hold it in place, and then hit all the other ones. And you'll feel that it goes into place anyways. There's really only one position that it actually feels good in place, but you will have to put some pressure on it to actually hold it down in the right place. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply some solder to the actual soldering iron to start with. This isn't going to be the final solder of this point that I'm choosing here. It's just to tack it in place so that this doesn't actually move on me. And actually, I'm going to hit both sides a little bit. So I chose to hit both sides of that one. And what I'll do is I'll do the middle poles first. Trying to get it into the camera there. Okay, so we got the solder on those points there. Now we're going to hit the outside. For the outside ones, I mean, you don't have to worry about too much solder, but what you want is a good bond between the actual unit and the pad itself. So you want a good amount to actually be in place, so you actually have a good bond, so that the actual port's not actually being pulled up. So you really don't have to worry about too much. There's nothing to actually short on the edges, but you want to make sure that you're actually heating up the pad too. So some people may be like, oh no, it looks like it's too much. I've never had an issue with that. I'd rather have a little bit too much than not enough and actually have it lift up. So now I'm going back to the pads that I started with, that were just kind of tacked down in place. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll finish off with a little bit of clean up here, just some rubbing alcohol. Okay. So there's a replacement port in place there. And as you can see, or attempt to see, let me see if I can. There we go. There's a little better focused. You can see the actual soldering there. So yes, there's quite a bit of solder on each of the actual joints themselves. But it's right down to the actual pads. And I'd rather have a little bit more solder than not enough. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of components around. So, you know, the nearest components is, you know, like these guys here. But you're not going to short anything out. So having a little extra means that you're covering the whole pad at least. So you're not going to cause any issues with it. So what we'll do is we'll put the top cover back on. So I'll just go to the zoomed in bench shot here. Get that camera out of the way. So just quickly, I'm not going to hook up the, actually, yeah, maybe I will. I should have mentioned, actually, when you take off the top cover, there is the left and the right thumb triggers, or the bumpers, that are actually hooked up to the motherboard. And these just get pulled right off. So I just kind of flick them off. They're very, very, they're not exactly fragile, so you don't have to worry. And then when you go to put it back on, you just find this one's actually not much of an issue. You just find where it actually pinches on to. Pinch it on. This is usually the one because it doesn't actually usually line up square. There we go. So you just pinch it on, make sure it snaps into place. And then we close that up. Now, as I mentioned, and we'll see if we can get a zoomed in picture there. See if we can get it focused. Focus. No, I think I have the focus turned off. But you can see it there. There's a little bit of black showing at the top edge of the actual port there. And that's what I was talking about. It doesn't fit 100%, but this will actually go into the charge cradle, no problem at all. It just solves the issue of cost effectiveness for the customer. We'd have to charge a lot more if we were to take out the main board and actually run it through with the hot air torch and do the repair that way. It's also a lot riskier for the board. You're heating up a lot of components on the board that don't necessarily need to be heated up, so I'd rather do the conservative way, especially when I know it actually works. We do a lot of these repairs. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I believe I have I had it hooked up, the charger for the 3DS. I actually have a system bench testing over here, so it's a little harder to get access to it. Maybe I have a full-size charger kicking around. Okay, sorry, it's going to take 2 more seconds. Just going to put that system on the ground so I can open my drawers properly here. My filing cabinet kind of works double duty in some cases. It kind of holds systems that tend to be bench testing. So I have a PS3 system that's just bench testing, which funny enough, as it was bench testing, the stock power supply ended up blowing on it. So I get the fun job of calling the customer tomorrow saying that their system was in for one repair, and now the stock power supply that was on their system has actually died, which means there's another item that needs to be replaced on it. Okay, so charge port on this one is at the front, so we're just gonna plug it in there, and you'll see the charge is on. So the one thing we do is tend to wiggle it around, and as you can see, now I'm not sure if that's actually the generic power. I'm going to chalk that up as being the generic USB charger. I've had issues with these generic 3-in-1 or 4-in-1 chargers. So I'm going to try it with a proper charger too. I'm not going to say that that's a problem with the actual port that I installed, because I know those solder points are very well done. I wouldn't say that the flickering of the light is actually a problem with that. I say it's a problem with the actual USB plug rather than the job I did. So I think that's going to do it for now. If there's any more issues or follow-up to this, if there is a problem with the other charge cable, then I'll come back and do a follow-up on this one and add to the end of it. But otherwise, it's a pretty easy job. All I need to do is put the screws back into the back of the system, which is just a reverse of what we started out with, and that's about it. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Just click the little subscribe button, which is just at the bottom of the screen over here, and we appreciate your subscription. Thanks. Talk to you soon.